Hello, today's lesson is on external sources of finance as a business expands. So in our previous lesson, we looked at internal sources of finance from within the business, which included retained profit and selling assets. Today's lesson is about external sources of finance from outside the business and how that can be used to grow the business. Just a quick knowledge recall to get your brain working. What I would like you to do is to match what the expectations are to the different stakeholder groups. Remember from last year, a stakeholder is anyone who has an influence on the success of the business. So first one, so there you've got what they expect to provide employment and limit the noise pollution. And that answer is E, the local community. So you just write down E in the answer box provided. So if you can complete the rest, pause the screen and then complete the rest of the answers, please. So now you would find the answers. As we said, the first one was the local community. Second one, for the business to be profitable and receive dividends. That's what the shareholders of limited companies expect. To be paid on time at a fair price. That is a supplier, so that's straight across. To be paid well, good working conditions and promotion prospects. That is what an employee, someone who works for the business, expects. And then the final one, to receive good quality product services at a reasonable price. That is what the customer would expect. So pause the screen if you need to make sure that you've got the correct answers. So today's objectives. We're looking at two major external sources of finance and the advantages and disadvantages to raise finance. That's going to be the first one, a public limited company, and secondly, through loan capital to raise finance. And then to finish off again, you'll have a case study where you'll be able to evaluate what is the best source of finance in the situation. So first of all, another knowledge recall. What's the difference between limited and unlimited liability? Have a think. You don't necessarily have to write anything down, just have a think in your brain, pause the screen and have a think what it means. So, unlimited liability. As the name suggested, liability is what you owe, what your responsibilities are. So where you've got unlimited liability, that means the owners of the business are personally responsible for all the debts of the business. They are in law, the people who own these businesses are the same as the business itself. So sole traders and partnerships have unlimited liability. So if a partnership got into debts of £100,000, there were two partners. Both partner would be responsible for 50,000 of the debt. They all have to pay the debt of the business. Limited liability, on the other hand, is when the business and the owners of it are separate legally. So what we mean by that, the owners of the business are not personally responsible for the debts of the business. They could only potentially lose what they paid for the share in the business. So the value of the shares that they bought. Now there's two types of limited company: private and public limited companies. Last year you looked at private limited companies, and today we're going to consider public limited companies. So a public limited company, like a private limited company, which you should also remember as an LTD, they're owned by the shareholders and run by the directors. So if you're a part owner of a private limited company, you are called a shareholder, not an owner. And they're run by the directors. These are the people who make the decisions. So you may have a board of directors, a group of people who make the decisions. Also, like a limited company, the shareholders have limited liability. That's the reason why they're both called limited companies. You've got private limited companies and public limited companies. With a private limited company, you have to invite the shareholders. But with a public limited company, anyone can buy shares. So private limited company, the board of directors may think we want to raise finance. We'll ask this person if he wants to become a shareholder of the business. With a public limited company, that's not the same. Any member of the public who is over the age of 18 can buy shares in a business. Shares are bought and sold on the stock exchange in London, and it's a major way of raising finance and growing the business. So a business such as McDonald's, Tesco, Nike, any of the major companies that you can think of, they will have hundreds of thousands of small shareholders. And then they will get rewarded by hopefully the share price increasing on the stock exchange, but also a share of the profits each year, which is called a dividend. So those are just examples of British companies that are public limited companies. Virgin is an interesting one that used to be a public limited company and is now a private limited company, and that allows Richard Branson to keep control of the business. But most of the major large businesses that you're aware of on the high street will be public limited companies. So public limited companies, the advantages are there that one, it's a large way of raising finance. As we said before, a business may have hundreds of thousands of shareholders, all buying shares from £1 to £100,000 or £1 million. There is no limit to what they buy, so you can raise a huge amount of capital very quickly. And once you've got a huge amount of finance, that finance can be used to expand the business. But from our previous work on mergers and takeovers, if your business has got more finance and a greater profile, it'll be easier for them to take over other businesses. And also, it gives more attention and more status and a higher profile to the business. So again, if you want to pause to write down the advantages of a public limited company. The disadvantages of a public limited company, because there's a lot more shareholders, you can then lose control of the business. A private limited company, you are inviting the shareholders, so it's easy. You know the type of person who's investing with you. You may trust them. But this is not the case with a public limited company, where you can have people buying large quantities of shares and gradually taking control of the business. So it may be difficult because you've got lots and lots of shareholders. The greater amount of shareholders, they require dividends. And as we said on the previous lesson, once a business makes a profit, there's three things that happen to it. One, they have to pay the government tax in the form of corporation tax. Two, they pay the shareholders dividends, and then the rest of it is retained. So if you've got hundreds of thousands of shareholders expecting dividends, then potentially there's less retained profit in the business for them to expand in the future. They've used the shareholders' funds to expand, but it could be difficult for them to grow in the future if they've got a huge cost or expense of paying dividends out. And finally, as well, you have to provide information, financial information, to the public. So any member of the public can look at the accounts to see how much profit they've made, even look at things like how long it takes them to pay their suppliers. Then you've got loan capital, which we have looked at last year, but again, bringing up again this year. So it's borrowing from the bank and then paying back in installments over a period of time with interest. Hopefully, these are familiar from last year. So you can receive a large lump sum of cash to expand the business, and unlike shareholders through public limited companies, you keep in control of the business and over the decision-making process. The key problem is that you're increasing the debts of the business, and the interest payments on the debt, you're increasing your debts and you're increasing your fixed costs. You have to pay interest, and it might be difficult to get a loan from a bank. Banks are there to make a profit, so they may find it difficult to do that. So again, pause the screen if you've got any issues, and make sure you write down all the advantages and disadvantages. Now, the case study. We've got a 6 and an I-mark question here. So we're using the expansion of the Amy's Kitchen again. So, first question there, why is she right not to expand by selling franchising? So, again, it's a 6-mark question. So the issue here is, I would like you to try and develop, using the case study, a chain of argument which would include 6 sentences on what is a problem with expanding through franchising. And if you have an issue, sentence 2 points with 3 sentences each. And then the second question there, you got the 9-mark question. Arguments for becoming a public limited company, receiving a bank loan, and what do you think the best source of finance is? So an argument using the case for being a public limited company, an argument for receiving a loan, and then making sure you've linked it into Amy's Kitchen, and then your conclusion. Okay, thank you very much. So what we should be comfortable with now is the 2 methods of external sources of finance that a business can use to grow. So external from outside the business, and they include the public limited company and also loan capital. Thank you.